How you doing? Good to see you. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. Is that all I get? Thank you. Come on. Do we need some more coffee for everybody? It's great to be back at the NAE Grand Challenges Summit. I am Milos O'Brienopoulos. I am enjoying my life as an immensely smart Greek engineer. I decided to kind of be in role all last night, so I found out that women love guys with pocket protectors. Who knew, right? I decided I should think like an engineer too. I found myself doing some very strange things. I spent about an hour researching the most efficient route back to the hotel, factoring in construction, traffic, wind, cycles of traffic lights, and the curvature of the earth. It was great. I stopped for gas along the way, decided it would be a lot of fun to rotate the tires. Stopped at Target, and I bought a half dozen white shirts, short sleeve. I got back to the hotel. I flipped the channels between Nova, the Discovery Channel, and Big Bang Theory. I spent some time surfing the web. I found myself at CNET, PC World, and Popular Mechanics. Great stuff. And then I rifled through my swag bag, and I found this thing. Did you see this thing? And it was so cool. I don't know what it is. I took it apart to see how it works. For some bedtime reading, I read the camera manual that I have with me. And then this morning, when I flushed the toilet, I looked and I decided I better look up a little more about the Coriolis effect. So, you guys know how to live, baby, I'm telling you. The Grand Challenges Summit Student Design Competition is something we've been telling you a little about. At the regional summits, we've had teams put together some great ideas, and the overall theme, the challenge to them was to come up with something that improves human well-being in the developing world. The winners of the previous competitions have all been invited to present their commercials, if you will, that explain their projects here. We saw 3 yesterday. We're going to see 2 more today. And at 2 o'clock, you're all going to want to be here for the unveiling of the winner with a big check for them, too. So it'll be very exciting. We'll do it Ryan Seacrest style. We'll make them sweat a little bit. So anyway, without further ado, let's roll commercial number 4.
In the developing world, access to medical care is often limited or non-existent, especially for rural populations. For these people, it's not as easy as jumping in your car to reach a physician. Clinics could be 5, 10, or even more miles away, and you have to go on foot. When you need every day's wages just to feed your family and keep a roof over your head, people just can't afford to make that trip.
I think what it really boils down to is cost. When your budget is a few hundred or a few $1,000s, you just don't have the ability to bring in all the technology and personnel you need to treat patients. So you have to prioritize. And that means some people are going to wind up without care.
I saw a lot of these problems firsthand in Ecuador when I spent 3 months working with local physicians in rural clinics and urban hospitals. What really struck me was the lack of diagnostic capability in most of the small clinics. The local physicians repeatedly told me they didn't need new technology. What they needed was affordable technology. The diagnostic tools that they needed already existed, but they were simply too expensive for these resource-limited areas. And that's what really launched this effort.
The need for more affordable diagnostics is also keenly felt every day here in India. Shadowing clinicians here during the summer of 2010, I have witnessed many clinics forego diagnostics entirely, instead moving straight to treatment based on population data. Along with the risk of misdiagnoses and inappropriate treatments, this can place undue strain on clinic resources and patients. If we can create more affordable diagnostics, it can truly transform the practice of medicine here.
We focused on 3 major criteria: affordability, mobility, and accuracy. From the fusion of these needs, we designed DX Mobile.
The concept behind DX Mobile is simple. Despite limited resources, cell phones have become incredibly common all over the world. They have an interface with which people are familiar and enough processing power to handle the needs of most diagnostic technologies. By utilizing a smartphone as the center of a diagnostic suite, you eliminate the cost of computing power and interface materials from every diagnostic technology you want to use. This cuts the cost dramatically. DX Mobile is designed as a diagnostic toolkit, with the Android-capable smartphone acting as the hub for a suite of small, inexpensive diagnostic instruments. Without the need for screens, interfaces, and processing, each instrument can be constructed with really inexpensive components focused solely on its application.
This approach also could dramatically cut development costs and difficulty, as the only components to be designed are the electronics for acquiring the data that you need. At its very core, DX Mobile is designed to be modular, and each inexpensive module will be designed to interface with the smartphone hub.
DX Mobile offers huge advantages to the user as well. By using the same interface for each component of the toolkit, there will be a much smoother learning curve for each new instrument. Moreover, the small size and modular nature of the system offers unmatched portability and flexibility for the end user, qualities that are extremely valuable in resource-limited settings.
Here in India, doctors are well acquainted with the dangers posed by neonatal jaundice. That's why most neonatal wards are equipped to treat the condition. But cost and risk of infection often limit the use of blood testing to identify patients for treatment.
To reduce the risk of neonatal infection, we designed a non-invasive instrument to measure bilirubin levels in infants, allowing doctors to predict the onset of jaundice. The instrument collects an optical measurement of tissue reflectance, allowing us to determine bilirubin levels simply by placing a probe against the infant's forehead. Our device is expected to cost less than $50 to produce.
2 years ago, I saw the need for affordable diagnostic technology in developing countries. My peers were enthusiastic to join me in using our bioengineering training to address these needs. Back then, I had a vision for our student group, but it was nowhere close to how much we've achieved today. We've come together as a group of talented, passionate students and built a device that is really going to revolutionize healthcare for people in the developing world.
All right, give them a round of applause. That's number 4. We'll be hearing from the final one, number 5, at about 2 o'clock again. Then we'll see, bring them all out, and we'll select the winner for you. This panel on communications is something I know a little something about, unlike the other ones. And I think the headline that comes across this morning is straight out of Cool Hand Luke. What we got here is a failure to communicate. For you kids, that was a movie from 1967. Look it up. It's a good one. IMDb it. This is a very deep-seated problem. Our education system doesn't produce enough people who are scientifically, technically literate or engaged. The mainstream media is fixated on the latest tabloid scandal or some wacky statement from a Tea Party candidate or some water skiing squirrel somewhere. I guess it should come as no surprise to you that good science and technology reporters are now as rare as an engineer at a fashion show. I am living proof of this, as a matter of fact. Fashion show as well. Meanwhile, engineers frankly don't, and I have to tell you straight, you don't do a very good job telling your own story. You have this silly, quaint notion that the facts, the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, should be enough to make your ideas prevail. Well, that might work when you're talking to another engineer, but not in the right brain world. So I guess it should come as no surprise that just yesterday, the governor of New Jersey, in his infinite wisdom, killed the largest public works project in the nation, a tunnel between Manhattan and New Jersey. The tunnel is dubbed the Access to the Region's Core project. It was aimed at doubling commuter trains between New York and New Jersey, increasing the number of Amtrak trains serving the Northeast Corridor. It would have included an expansion of New York's Penn Station, created 6,000 jobs, 22,000 cars off the road. Sounds like a project worthy of the NAE Grand Challenge seal of approval, right? Well, the governor decided it was too expensive. And yes, it is a $9 billion project, and that is nothing to sneeze at. But several billion have already been spent. And the real question is this an expense or is it an investment in our future? So this is where the rubber meets the road, engineers. The grand challenges may seem obvious to you. but we have a failure to communicate. So let's start trying to figure out how to bridge this gap, or maybe in this case, tunnel the gap. We'll be taking questions from the audience afterward. There'll be people with microphones in the aisles, so look for them, wave them down, and get my attention one way or another. And of course, we'll be monitoring the Twitter feed this morning. Again, the hashtag, once again, is NAEGC 2010. You can also follow USC Viterbi or follow me at Miles O'Brien, all one. And we will, of course, include your tweets as part of the questions. Once again, hashtag NAEGC 2010. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the communications keynote speaker, Henry Jenkins, a Provost Professor of Communications, Journalistic, and Cinematic Arts here at USC and the former director of the famous MIT Media Lab. Give him a round of applause.
In fairness, I should say was not the former director of the MIT Media Lab, but the Comparative Media Studies program at MIT. And we're a program in humanities. And so part of my experience has been trying to build bridges with engineering and scientific community about some of the core human challenges we face, the heart of which is communications. And I'm going to talk today about what I call the new civic ecology. We're in the middle of a profound and prolonged period of media change, one that transforms every aspect of how we do our work, how we learn, how we run our families, how we engage with the world as citizens. And in the midst of it, we are trying to figure out how we build a communication system diverse enough to enable all kinds of scales and levels of communication. And so what we're seeing is very conflicting messages, very conflicting signs about the communication system we're talking about. Given that, what the changes that are going on right now are not technological, but social and cultural. Certainly technology is continuing to sweep forward, but the challenges you're going to face as you try to move your grand challenges and great solutions out of the laboratories and into the public is dealing with the profound process of change and how it's affecting our lives. So up here on the screen I have two signposts of this. One is Jefferson reading a newspaper with great forlorn, Jefferson having famously said that he'd rather live in a system with no government and a great newspaper than a system with a great government and no newspaper. And it says it looks like he's facing the lack of quality news. So the closing of newspapers is one of the signposts that we're seeing. Consolidations in major cities, some major cities now going without any daily newspaper in the sense that we've understand it. The other side is about pelicans organizing on Facebook. And the idea, it seems to me, is that every group, every public of small and large is taking advantage of social networking sites to build more robust communications within their own circles than ever before. So do we say we live in a great time communication-wise because of the expanded communication capacity of everyday people, or do we say we live in a very sad time because of the loss of many legacy media, as they're now being called, the closing out of the traditions of journalism that we've lived with? I think we have to say we're living in both. The reality is we're living in a moment when we are changing profoundly the communication practices. We're disrupting traditional journalism, but we haven't figured out how to replace it. So here we see someone on the newspaper, to a parent and child sitting in the sofa. The parent tells us the newspapers are planning to put all their stories about behind firewalls, and the kid said, "What's a newspaper?" Right? And then the kid's busily typing on his computer. Next to it is the headline someone pasted together, "Who killed the newspapers?" And part of the implication of this has been that young people turning their back on traditional news channels and embracing new media may be part of the problem. Although we could also say they're very much part of the solution. So here's a snapshot from the Pew Center of where we're at in this process. While there has been some decline in news consumption in recent decades, it's rising again. The people are consuming a lot of news and information. They're doing so through a variety of media channels, and they're doing so in a way that's being described as grazing for news. They're not simply tuning in for an hour of news each evening, but rather they wake up, flip on CNN for a few minutes while they're getting dressed. They may listen to the radio when they're driving to the office. While they're waiting for a meeting, they flip up their iPhone and they check a little information. They're chatting over the cafeteria with their friends. You know, it's a day-long process of constantly absorbing information, but not in the concentrated dose or the focused attention that previous generations were involved with. Now, a lot of the shift now is being pushed off on this idea of citizen journalists. And here, morally safer and experienced professional journalists said, I trust citizen journalism as much as I would trust citizen surgery. Now, that's not fair. But I don't love this term citizen journalism for a number of reasons. For my mind, it's like the term horseless carriage. It describes what's emerging in relation to what's come before. At best, it's a transitional term. That is, if I asked you today, name 10 things about your car, the fact that it's not pulled by horses would probably not rank on the top 10, right? We now have moved past the point where the automobile is a horseless carriage. We soon will move past the point when the distinguishing feature of this new information environment is that it's citizens doing journalism. For one thing, journalists are citizens, and they better remember that, or they're not going to be able to function well in the new environment. For another, what citizens are doing expands the civic ecosystem, but it isn't necessarily journalism. It's providing a variety of other functions, and we don't want to restrict what that new system looks like simply by calling it journalism. Well, it also sets up this opposition between professional and citizen journalism, when really what we want to talk about is a complex interplay between them. Oops, I can go back. I just hit the button twice. So what I want to focus on is what I call a civic ecology. That is the entire infrastructure of how we get news. And in the past, it might look something like the guy standing in front of the newsstand with all of the magazines to choose from. Now it may look like our slouchy friend here who says, well, if it wasn't for blogs, podcasts, and Twitter, I'd never know what was going on. Well, the point is we do have blogs, we do have podcasts, we do have Twitter, and most of them are connecting back to stories that were produced by network news, stories that were produced by professional newspapers. They are part of a system of communications that includes both participatory and commercial channels that we play an active role in selecting and moving information that matters to us to other people. We live in a monitorial democracy in which we're all monitoring the world around us and trying to grab the attention of other people about what matters to us. So sample of how that might work, we might look at what happened in Iran. What happened in Iran, contrary to what you may have read, is not a Twitter revolution. Even if we want to say it was a revolution of new technology, we have to also say it was a Flickr revolution, it was a YouTube revolution. It was conducted, the new media parts even, were conducted by a variety of platforms. Turns out it wasn't the case that kids in the street were using Twitter to organize protest against the Iranian government. For one thing, Twitter didn't have a Farsi alphabet. It couldn't facilitate the indigenous language where the protests were taking place. What happened in Iran was, as one of the cartoons below suggests, you couldn't throw out all the correspondence because the public became a correspondence. It was a country that had some of the most intense amount of blogging of any country in the world, and has an enormous diasporic community of Iranians all over the planet who were plugged into the local production of information. So what it was all about was shifting public opinion outside of Iran, keeping the focus of the West on what was taking place in Iran. That those of us here following the Twitter flow were engaged in a process of becoming educated and aware of the difference between Iranian citizens and their government, for example, after 30 years of propaganda that made it hard for us to separate out the two. So it was enormously important, but it was not important because it allowed Iranians to organize revolution. It was important because it allowed Iranians and Iranian diasporic people to communicate all over the planet with people who needed to be plugged into what was going on. So as I think about what advice I might give you as a media scholar about confronting the three challenges, I turn to this recent report the Knight Foundation has put out called Informing Communities, Sustaining Democracy in the Digital Age, and it has three pieces of advice about what we need to do. Maximize the availability of relevant and credible information to all Americans and their communities. We might add that to people all over the world. Strengthen the capacity of individuals to engage with information and promote individual engagement with information in the public life of the community. And I'm going to take each of those in turn. Oops, I hit the button twice. So first of all, challenge one, we want to maximize the availability of relevant and credible information. We need to figure out how we get information out to people. So the question is, who's responsible for communicating about science and technology in American society? The answer is every one of you in the room. The idea that there's going to be professional technology journalists who carry your message to the public, it's nice, it's good if it happens. Reality, it's up to you. So this chart here that sort of, both of the images here get at this. The first shows us the number of interesting scientists in the world, and a small subset of that are those who blog. Well, all of you should be blogging. All of you should be throwing information out to the public, learning to think about your work as something that is engaging to the public and matters to the public, and be able to answer those why questions. Those questions about quality, about efficiency, about plausibility. All of those questions need to be asked. And scientific writing, if it looks just like equations on the blackboard, it's not going to reach most of the people who aren't already part of the scientific community. So the challenge is to broaden access to information and take ownership of it. The good news is the new media world is providing more channels for that than ever before, fewer walls between you and the public. So this chart is about sort of science articles in Wikipedia. If you think Wikipedia is bad in your field, rewrite it. That's part of the point of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is an affordance that you have as a scientist or an engineer to get information out there. But also these tools of visualization, like the one we see here, are allowing the public to look at large data sets in different ways, and that's also part of what should be produced by your lab and thrown out to the world. Again, the ninth report is on America, but this is a global process. I was talking to a bunch of journalists yesterday who were bemoaning the lack of interest in foreign news. And I said, maybe the problem is you're calling it foreign news. We live in a globally connected society. We have a higher number of people from around the world in American society than ever before. When you call it foreign news, you're saying it happened to those people over there. You're not saying that this is part of our lives and it happens to involve a connection to someplace else on the planet. So Global Voices does a great job of translating blogs around the world into multiple languages so they can understand each other. Witness is a YouTube for human rights videos. And the bottom, Crunchyroll, is a site where people download content from Asia for amusement, mostly anime, soap operas, dramas. But the fact is that more and more Americans are seeking out content from overseas and engaging with it, even as we're being told that there's little interest in the marketplace for foreign news anymore. So we've got to question that, but we also have to recognize that when we communicate out, we're speaking to a global audience, and that's part of the challenge. Now, as we speak globally, we have to keep in mind, again, the civic ecology, that it's a multiple technologies at play. So here we see an image of some graphics that were produced around the Lebanon War, which were distributed via computers. People in various countries around the world printed them out and stuck them up on walls and lampposts. So there was a system that included the digital as well as paste-on media. The tapes to remind me of systems in Africa where, in fact, medical information is embedded in radio dramas that are distributed to truck drivers via tape that they listen to in their trucks as they go from one truck stop to the next. And in many parts of the world, the mobile phone or the Game Boy are much more readily means of communication technology than either the newspaper or television or the computer. As we think about it then, we have to recognize that we're struggling with a whole variety of challenges of reaching everyone if we focus only on digital and broadcast communication. One of them we know already is the digital divide, the question of who has access to network technology. The second one is the participation gap, who has access to the skills, the experiences that are vital to be part of a larger participatory culture. And the third one people are calling the civic empowerment gap, who feels authorized to speak, who feels connected to the information, who feels a part of the citizenly decisions of their society. And those are three big problems we all have to work to overcome if we're going to create a communication environment that's going to engage with the great challenges you're talking about. So challenge 2, strengthen the capacity to engage with information. That puts the connections between communication and education. Now, yes, we need to teach people how to read and write, but there's a variety of new skills that I identified in a white paper for the MacArthur Foundation. We also have to factor in, as people learn to become part of this new information ecology I'm describing, as they become part of a participatory culture, they have to evaluate information, they have to produce information, they have to circulate information. They are playing an active role in how your message gets out to the public. And one of the challenges you face there is as more and more people become communicators, there's a whole variety of different regimes of truth you're struggling with. In science and engineering, versions of the truth compete with a variety of others, some of which we might call falsehood. And we see this cartoon of Obama as a Muslim, and we see him from the evil mirror universe from Star Trek. Lots of perceptions of what the truth is about any political figure in today's environment. This white paper, Public Media 2.0, is sort of making the call for us to think not about public service media, which scientists work quite well with NPR and PBS, but to think of it as public facilitating media or public mobilizing media. Not just do we give information to people, but do they give them the knowledge, the skills, the power they need to mobilize around that information and make a difference in their community. And that brings us to the third challenge: how do we promote engagement with information? How do we get people off their seats and engaged to the world? So we can see new forms of activism, new kinds of community building taking place around the new media landscape. The documentary production company Brave New Films distributes its content initially through DVDs, now through the web. It organizes house parties at churches and homes to get people together, not just to watch information, but discuss information and act on information. And that's part of this. Now, one of the weapons that science and engineering have historically had along this line was the power to excite our imaginations and sense of wonder through the use of science fiction. Science fiction was created as a way of popularizing science and engaging the public with the great debates of science. For one thing, we discover one artifact of science fiction was the support the public showed to NASA during the gay days of the space mission. And even now, these photographs here from space are presented as space porn on a science fiction website, where fans still are fascinated with the photographs being produced by the satellites as they go deeper and deeper into space. So the science fiction community became a kind of public that scientists and engineers spoke to about these grand challenges, and these can become the shock troops who help mobilize around the kinds of issues that you're talking about. In fact, the work I'm doing right now with the MacArthur Foundation and the Spencer Foundation is looking at the ways people are mobilizing popular culture in order to engage with public policy issues. So we're seeing around the world people are dressing up like the Na'vi from Avatar in protest of indigenous people against logging companies, about the displacement from their homes that takes place by the government, about environmental issues of all kinds. We're seeing when the photographs couldn't be taken of the impact of wildlife in the Gulf oil spill, people began producing these cartoons of sympathetic characters, like here's SpongeBob soaking in oil, as a way of reminding us of the loss of life that's taking place there. And I'm very interested, I'm studying right now the Harry Potter Alliance, which is 100,000 Harry Potter fans around the world who have done things like raise 5 cargo planes of supplies for Haiti, engage with human rights issues in Darfur, focus on media concentration and worker rights and gay marriage issues in the United States. This is a very effective organization for mobilizing publics, and it works not through the rational argument, but by inciting the imagination and engaging us with issues. So I'll close to remind you then of my 3 big challenges on the communication front, the challenges Knight Foundation gave us. Maximize the availability of relevant and credible information to all peoples around the world, strengthen the capacity of individuals to engage with information, and promote individual engagement, and I should say collective engagement, with information in the public life of the community. And you as scientists, engineers, and I as a media scholar and a humanist, we have work to do together to expand the conversation about the grand challenges and their human consequences in the years ahead. As we do so, we'll work with both mainstream media and grassroots media, and media at all levels of this complex civic ecology. So, thank you. So I'm now supposed to introduce the remaining panelists who will come out here, and then they'll speak to you one by one about their perspective on these questions. Matthew Wald is a journalist from the New York Times. Ali Velshi is a journalist and chief business correspondent for CNN. And Jay Greene is a journalist and author of Design is How It Works. So I hope they'll join us out here.
Thank you very much. I have to start with a brief commercial for my employer of the last 30 years, the New York Times. We don't actually ask that you read the paper every day. All you have to do is buy it every day. And if you can't buy it, then at least next time you buy anything, a latte maker or something, you open the box, this little card flutters out, you fill it out for the warranty information. It says, how did you hear about our product? You must check the box that says newspaper advertising. Okay? Now, what happens if I push this button? There we go. Okay. I'm going to talk about the difficulty in communicating about sustainability and energy. We have a history of misconceptions, wishful thinking, and fantasy. It's easier to see this in hindsight than it is currently. This is a 50-year-old concept car. It was supposed to go 5,000 miles between refueling. To refuel, you took the nuclear reactor and you went to a shop, they took the nuclear reactor off the back of it and replaced it. Now, actually, I can't figure out which side the back is, but without going into all the ridiculous talk of what people thought of nuclear power in 1958, I think we should take the broader point. A lot of new technologies never pan out the way that we thought they would or that we hoped they would. That doesn't stop these technologies from capturing the public imagination. What's the modern version of the Ford Nucleon? It may be fusion. It's probably at least the fuel cell. Partisans communicate that the fuel cell gives off nothing but water vapor and electricity. A lot of people like that idea, including George Bush. He said in a State of the Union address that it was not too much to hope that a baby born when he gave the address, I think this was 2004, that child would have a fuel cell vehicle as his or her first car. Now, a fairly weird thing happened for American politics, which is when President Obama took office, we put a guy in charge of energy policy who's a physicist. He actually knows something about these things. That was Stephen Chu. He has a Nobel in physics. He said the fuel cell wasn't particularly promising. It wasn't promising enough to command much federal support. The production of the hydrogen is quite dirty. The technology for storing the hydrogen, converting it into current was extremely expensive compared to more promising approaches. And then what happened? He wanted to concentrate on things with more immediate payoff, like better batteries or advanced biofuels. So Congress told Chu, nah, what do you know? All you got is a Nobel in physics. And so we're still pursuing fuel cells. Energy, it turns out, is a branch of politics. Let's look at all this talk about energy with some skepticism and sustainability with some skepticism. Right now, a lot of the talk is focused on getting government help for this or that, wind or solar, nuclear, exotic ways to burn coal. This is not engineering talk. This is not bias-free scientific communication. All this comes down to new and interesting ways to spend public money. And by public money, I mean your money, not mine. I don't intend to be paying big bucks in taxes for more than another 10 or 15 years. It's our children's money we're spending here. You hear a lot about energy that comes from companies that want government help to sell their product. That's oil, gas, coal, nuclear, solar, and wind. Now, in fairness, this is a pretty complicated subject. Energy comes from a lot of different places, ends up in a lot of different places. I've got a spaghetti monster of a chart here. Don't worry, this will not be on the midterm. One of the previous presenters had a similar chart. Just take the point that we get energy in a lot of different places. We try to transform it. More and more, we turn fuel into electricity before we use it. Some of the newer sources, like wind or photovoltaics, and some not so new, like nuclear, are almost always fed into electricity. The tricks we're working on now is to turn electricity into a substitute for oil, so the amount of carbon dioxide per mile can decline. That turns out to be surprisingly complicated, involving a battery we don't have yet. But there are other possibilities. You could use a nuclear plant to make liquid fuel instead of making electricity. You could turn coal into hydrogen and sequester the carbon dioxide. You could then use the hydrogen in cars. It's not clear which of these ideas will actually pan out and which ones are the Ford Nucleon of our new young century. But it's hard to explain to people right now that there's no number of windmills that will replace the Deepwater Horizon. So we've thought, we have, though, persuaded people of some things that just aren't so. Take, for instance, compact fluorescence. I did this calculation on 5 bulbs because one was too small to bother with. It does okay on carbon, it does okay on money, it doesn't do a thing for oil. We have to conserve, we have to save oil, here's your compact fluorescent. Anybody want to guess why? It's because there isn't any oil in our generation mix anymore. It's already 98.9% oil-free, like one of those bad salad dressings. Now, here's another one, why wind is not the answer to all of our problems. This is a slide that the Energy Secretary, Stephen Chu, showed about a year ago for the Bonneville Power Administration. As you can see, demand for electricity went up and down every day by time of day based on need for heat, for lighting, for TV, etc. The wind blew when it wanted to. And when the wind contributed, it did so erratically. So the BPA needs just as much conventional generation as it ever had. With lots of wind machines, you could save fuel at some hours using wind instead. This being the Pacific Northwest, you could save some water to run through a dam later. But while the wind was producing what the engineers call energy, it wasn't providing any capacity, that is, any ability to shut down old, dirty power plants on a permanent basis. We could solve this problem with more transmission. Here's an idea I'd like to communicate to you. When it comes to transmission, there's a public interest and there's an interested public, and those are two different things. I described wind first because it's by far the biggest and cheapest renewable. Here's another one, solar. Yes, one of the goals of the NAE is to make solar less expensive. You still have to face this problem. This also came from the Department of Energy. That is one of solar's friends. Now, here's another problem in communication that doesn't get communicated. Yes, all these things make energy, but our electric system needs more than just energy. It needs capacity. Capacity is the ability to bear load. When the load is there, if I have a 150-watt computer and a 150-watt wind machine, I don't want to be limited to using the computer when the wind is available. The nuclear plant will run about 90% of the hours in a year. The wind, if it's in a good place, will run 30 to 35%. The solar is down around 20%. So a megawatt of nuclear produces 5 times as much energy as a megawatt of solar. We've communicated to people that we can solve our problems with new appliances. I can't really see the audience because of the light in my eyes. I know there's some young people out there and some older people out there. You can replace the Harvest Gold refrigerator. Does anybody here remember Harvest Gold when that was the only kind of appliance you could buy? With some bizarre shade of maybe avocado. It's amazing we lived through the 80s, isn't it? You could save some money and some carbon with a new refrigerator, but you may end up buying a bigger one, or one with automatic defrosting or other features, so you may not save much actual electricity. At least if you do that, you'll be getting more work for your kilowatt hour. Here's another wrong thing we've communicated, that the internal combustion engine is a mature technology. This is an EPA chart. What it shows is that since 1975, we've used the same amount of gasoline to produce a vehicle that'll go from 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds. It used to be 14. Today, 14 is a dog. At the same time, we're driving around in cars that are substantially heavier. What we've done is to reduce it to a single automobile. I used to own the one on the left. It died of rust. But the Camry is about the same now as it was then. I'm missing it. There we go. But we can see we bulked it up. It's getting the same miles per gallon. It's increased in weight by about a quarter, and it's a lot zippier. Do we communicate this to anybody? Not really. If we went back to if we were serious about global warming, we went back to the performance and weight characteristics of the 1980s, we'd be using about 25% less gasoline. This is what really matters. This also doesn't get communicated. Buy a car that gets 2 miles more per gallon. You save a lot of carbon dioxide, a lot of money. You save the need for another Deepwater Horizon. Or cut your, I get to and from work on a vehicle that gets 6 miles a gallon. It's called a bus. I know you have some of those out here. We could certainly have more. And that would be a huge reduction in energy use. And that is a blank page. Why is that a blank page? Okay, because I'm out of things to say. I want to tell a quick story about engineers. I have 12 seconds left. I was invited down to Pittsburgh to the old days when Westinghouse was still an independent company, to the Power Systems Division. and the PR guy from Westinghouse is with me, and we walk into the room, and there's the vice president. He's got this table, long table with engineers around it, and he says, we have the ability around this table to do business in 8 different languages. And the PR guy whispers to me, he says, yeah, and 2 of them are English. So there is a translation problem out here, and you had a very good keynote speech, but I'd add the point that you can write things other people can't read. There is a translation issue. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ali Velshi. Matthew, thank you for that. My name is Ali Velshi, and I am the Chief Business Correspondent for CNN. And I'm an anchor on CNN. I anchor from, normally I say 1 to 3 p.m. every day, but that's Eastern, so take 3 hours off of that. You guys are the scientists in the room. And I do a business show on weekends. Miles is an old friend of mine. We worked together for many years at CNN, and we were really the only 2 guys on air interested in science and technology, and now there's 1. And Miles was always sort of better at it. So we have a lot of the same interests in life, but Miles was always better at the stuff that we both liked. I can fly a plane. Miles actually flies one on a regular basis. My pilot's license is lost somewhere and has been for several years. Miles did a story some years ago that remains to this day my best explanation and the greatest understanding I have for how the internet works. And what he did is he took a phone book. I think it was a phone book you took, and he ripped it all up, stuck the ripped pages into various envelopes, mailed them to himself, took them out, and reassembled them, and explained that that's how things get sent over the internet, which is very valuable. It's a valuable way to understand these things, and this is the challenge with which we are faced in the world of TV. Unlike Matthew, when a screen goes blank, it doesn't matter to me. I talk with no information anyway. But what we have to do for our audience is we have to explain. Generally speaking, as a business correspondent, I've had to explain complicated things, including the things that have taken place over the last 3 years in the financial world, in a way that my audience can understand, understanding that my audience may be made up of business professionals, may be made up of doctors, may be made up of engineers, may be made up of people with very little education, and they all have to understand that, because doctors don't understand personal finance, and engineers don't understand some of the other things that we talk about. Now, how many people in this room, by the way, are engineering students? Okay, and how many of you are engineers? All right. When I went to school, I wouldn't have occurred to me to study engineering, partially because I thought you studied engineering because you were inclined to do so. Either you knew somebody who was an engineer, you liked that sort of area of study, and it was going to give you a job for sure, and you'd go on living happily ever after. The new realization that I share with my audience on a daily basis now is that you are the people we depend on for our economic future. And not just our economic future, it can be for our future as a healthy race. It can be for our future as a technologically advanced world. And all of a sudden, it has become substantially more important to understand the value of an engineering education to our economy and the world in which we live than it was when I was growing up. It was obviously important to engineers and obviously important to the schools who educated people, but ultimately it didn't matter to the rest of us. We took for granted that engineers were out there, scientists were out there, biologists were out there inventing, discovering, and finding cures for things, and things were just moving along at a remarkable pace, particularly in this country where that's how they moved along. All of a sudden we have a problem in which traditional ways of doing business are not keeping the United States competitive, and we have matters that are challenging us that we actually need to all come together and determine how we're going to solve these problems. This isn't just a matter of if the U.S. doesn't do it, someone else will do it. The fact is, this still remains ground zero for the type of innovation that the world has counted on for the last 100 years. Are we doing enough about it? And there are two things I do on my show every single day. Miles would be proud of me. I have a segment called The Big I, which is the big idea. And it is a segment that is, I would say, half the time populated by engineers, where we're discussing inventions. We're discussing innovations. We're discussing things that are not at market, but they are ideas. The bar for that segment is discussing something that will change the world and make it a better place. Now, what does this have to do with CNN? Well, I access several 100,000 viewers a day. Not all of them are interested in science or technology or innovation or engineering, but I really make a point of trying to make the time that I am anchoring on TV different from what many people criticize cable news for being. We're not out there blaming people and looking for reasons why things are bad. We will bring you the news, but we are looking for solutions. And what I want to do specifically to create value for my audience is connect them to the inventions that are going to be important for our economy and for their livelihoods. So when we do one of these big I's, we do it with specific reference to what you need to know about it to make you seem smart. Because seeming smart is a good starting point for a lot of people in life. Whether you're going to a bar, or you're talking to your employer, or you're applying for a job in this environment, that's number one. Just making you smart. Number two is allowing you to take advantage of this trend or this idea or this innovation financially. So does this mean that you can invest in somebody who's doing this? If I help you understand solar energy, is that an opportunity for you to invest in it? Invest in a mutual fund, or if you're very wealthy, help a little startup get going. Is it an opportunity for you to prosper by moving to a part of the country that is heavily invested or otherwise involved in a particular technology, or apply for a job at a particular company, or retrain into an industry because there will be increasing demand for it as a particular technology evolves? Or is it an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your college-bound student about an area of study that they can get into, particularly in this case, engineering? Because so many of these discoveries from which we will profit are dependent on having very, very well-trained engineers out there in the world. And that leads to another segment that I do every single day on my show, regardless of what the news is. I always do a big I, and I always do something called Chalk Talk, which is a focus on public education, with a particular interest in the importance of STEM education in public high schools in America. The idea being, if we can interest people, if we can interest students and their parents in the potential of a strong science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education at the earliest levels, we then provide greater feedstock for our universities, and that addresses many of the issues that we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So these are the two areas in which I focus on trying to underscore the importance of engineering education and a strong engineering background for this country. And then, by the way, that then connects to almost everything else we cover, because energy is a remarkable area of coverage for us, not just as a news anchor, which it is, but also as a business anchor, because it's a remarkable area of, it touches everybody and their prosperity, either as an investment, as a future, or as a cost. So these are, when we talk about engineering and inventions, it works its way into the auto industry, it works its way into the energy industry, it works its way into transportation, it works its way into the environment, all things which then touch all of my viewers. So the idea is that we are looking for stories, we dig deep to find stories which my viewer can relate to, and then give them some background, sometimes even marginally technical background. We use charts and breakdowns, and I've got a couple resident geeks on staff who love this stuff, and make it palatable for our audience. So the struggle here is in the fantastic grand challenges that the National Academy has, and the challenges as they relate to everything in our economy and our environment. is to find these stories, effectively find ways to get them into the media, and then for those of us in the media to effectively find ways to explain them in a fashion that is palatable and disarming to our viewership, allowing them to fully take advantage of the potential and the opportunities there. And as far as I break it down, those opportunities are several-fold. They are investment opportunities, they are employment opportunities, they are retraining opportunities, they are relocation opportunities, and they are advantages and opportunities for your kids who are in high school and then going into college. It's been a project that we've been on for over a year now. It's working pretty well. I mean, the bar is high, but I'm able to provide this information on a daily basis to our audience, and when I come out to things like this, I meet all sorts of interesting people, and somehow that ends up being more coverage on TV for ideas that I didn't know about. So I thank you for listening to my comments on this, and I look forward to a good, robust discussion. And Miles, good to be on stage with you.
I got to say, I was a little concerned following Ali, and I told my agent I didn't want to follow a CNN anchor. That was dangerous. But, you know, the fact is actually his ideas lead right into mine, so I'm feeling okay about it now. So my name is Jay Greene. I've been a journalist all my professional life. I spent 10 years writing for Business Week. I was their Seattle bureau chief, and I left Business Week last December and finished writing a book about design and innovation called Design is How It Works. And Penguin released it about 2 months ago now. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these points actually Ali brought up about communicating your ideas, but I want to be a little bit counterintuitive. I want to suggest some strategies that you might want to use as you talk with folks like us that might not seem particularly obvious or even wise, but I'm going to make the case to you that they really are. And I want to jump off with an idea that Peter Diamandis raised yesterday on the innovation panel, and he talked about the importance of embracing failure and even rewarding it. You know, and the point was that some of the greatest risks you can take end up in failure, and it happens, but some of those greatest failures lead to wonderful insights. And so I'm here to tell you that you need to talk publicly about your failures. You need to let the world know it when you blow it. And that's counterintuitive. It might not sound obvious. No one likes to be held up to public ridicule. No one likes to be raked over the coals, but here's why it's important. You need to let everyone know in your company, in your lab, in your organization, that failure's okay. It means you're willing to take big risks in order to achieve big breakthroughs. It also means you're willing to learn from your mistakes and not sweep them under the rug. And so I'll give you an example from my book. I wrote about a company called Cliff Bar. It's not an engineering company by any stretch of the imagination, but it's actually a very innovative company nonetheless. And there's some lessons in Cliff Bar that are instructive, and one of them, to me anyway, is how the company deals with failure. And so a few years ago, well, Cliff Bar, for those of you who don't know, and I'm guessing most of you probably do, but they make energy foods for athletes, you know, bars and goo and protein foods to help runners and cyclists and climbers perform at their peak. And a few years ago, there was this thing called the low-carb craze, and everybody was on the Atkins diet. And Cliff Bar got a lot of pressure from their buyers, from their lenders to jump on that bandwagon. They figured that's where the next business opportunity was. And never mind that Cliff Bar's entire business strategy was about shoving carbs down your gullet so you'd have some energy to perform well. Cliff Bar ignored its better instincts, dumped a lot of money into this business, launched something called the Luna Glow. It had just 2 carbs. And guess what? It bombed. I mean, it cost the company $1 million. But here's the interesting thing to me. All the senior executives at Cliff Bar openly discuss the Luna Glow debacle with anyone who asks, including journalists like me. It pains them to talk about it. It isn't a fun conversation, but there are lessons to be learned from the experience. And the primary one in this case was that the company failed because it made an inauthentic product. And the reason they talk with folks like me is they want every employee at the company to know the story so it's never repeated. It's part of the company folklore. You know, so the point here is failure is painful, but it's instructive. And if you hide your missteps, even from journalists, maybe even especially from journalists, you're much more likely to repeat them. All right, so counterintuitive idea number 2. Sometimes small is bigger than you think. And so actually, I was thinking about this yesterday when Lockheed Martin's Jeff Wilcox made this point. He was discussing the decision to stop painting the space shuttle fuel tanks white in order to shave some weight off of them, make them viable. And that's hardly an innovation on the magnitude of the 14 grand challenges. But I gotta tell you, it's a great story. If I was a journalist covering aerospace, I would have just eaten that thing up. So let me give you another example from my book. And, it's a little innovation that really became a successful product. Okay, it's a staple remover. Really, it's a staple remover. It's made by a company called OXO. And some of you will know about OXO. They make kitchen gadgets. They make a really cool vegetable peeler. They have these measuring cups that are awesome where you pour water in and you can actually see how much liquid is in the measuring cup so you don't have to cock your head and look at it. I mean, they're clever folks. But a few years ago, OXO decided to bring its design shops to office supplies. And one of the first products they came up with was a staple remover. Now it's hard to really imagine innovation in staple removing technology. But, you know, they found that people get really frustrated with those claw-like staple removers that, you know, rip paper when you're trying to pull them out. And so they put some innovative design minds, engineers to this task, and they came up with something that was really novel and really simple. And so I don't have it with me, but it's a staple remover that kind of looks like a letter opener. It has a little tongue, and what's cool is that the tongue gradually gets wider and thicker as it gets to the base. And that way the staple just gradually disengages from the paper as you slide the staple remover over it. Okay, so, you know, like Lockheed Martin's, paint revelation, this is hardly the stuff of a Nobel Prize. It's a small breakthrough, but it turned into a hugely successful product. And what's interesting is that, you know, this thing costs actually 6 times as much as those claw-like staple removers, but it's one of the, I think, top 2 or 3 products in the office products category for OXO. And it's a great story. It's creative and it's interesting and it's the kind of stuff that folks like writing about, and I think you guys might even like hearing about. All right, so that gives me, it brings me to counterintuitive idea number 3. And this, it's the opposite of this, which is sometimes big is a lot smaller than you think it is. So when I worked for Business Week, I live in Seattle. I wrote a lot about Microsoft. That's what you do when you live in Seattle. And, you know, one of the things I quickly learned about Microsoft is that one of its core competencies is in hiring. They hire really smart people, and, you know, no place is that more evident in their research group. You know, the company collects brilliant engineers the way a 7-year-old collects baseball cards. I mean, they're just smart folks there. And, you know, these great minds come up with terrific breakthroughs. So 8 years ago, I wrote a story about, this for Business Week, about how the company was about to launch its tablet PC with some partners. And so this is a laptop computer, and you'd open it up, you'd flip the screen over, you put it back down, and you could write on it. But then when you put the screen back up, it was just like a laptop computer again. And there's some really smart folks at Microsoft that developed, you know, some clever technology that could do a really great job translating handwriting to text. All right, and there's some other folks there who came up with this font technology where, they eased eye strain by the way the fonts were rendered. It was pretty impressive stuff. And, you know, I still remember talking with Bill Gates about this for a story, and he said, you know what, in just a few years, every company that makes a laptop will be making a tablet computer. And it'll be because of some of these breakthroughs. And the fact is it didn't work out that way. And you go, why? I mean, Bill's a super smart guy too, right? What went wrong? And so I have some thoughts. But one of it is that writing to text technology is really clever, no doubt. But was it useful, right? I do a lot of writing. I interview folks, take down notes, I read books, jot down some ideas. I've rarely found the need to translate my own writing to text. I'm pretty good at reading it, actually. And you know, when I want to convey my ideas to others, I select the relevant bits, I add a bit of context, maybe flavor and a little bit of color, type it up and send it off. It's a great bit of technology, but it wasn't a mainstream application, and it certainly wasn't the mainstream application Microsoft thought it was. And what about that nifty font technology? It was called ClearType, if you're keeping score, and some of you may remember it. And actually, it's in every version of Windows today. It really is great technology. But the idea back then was, you know, you do this and folks could actually use it to read books. Well, you know, it turns out that if you hold a 4-pound tablet PC in your hand like a book for more than about 15 minutes, you're going to just die. I mean, that thing's brutal. And, you know, so it was a great technology. But, you know, contrast that to, you know, to Miles' iPad there, right? I think he's playing video games on it now. But but that's £1.50 pounds, right? And the new Kindle that's coming out is 8.5 ounces, right? So these were big breakthroughs. But they weren't as big as Microsoft thought they were. You know, and the fact is they wound up being niche applications and consumers didn't really care. And you know, I guess the lesson is don't drink your own bathwater. You can come up with great breakthroughs, but you know, there are those times they aren't going to be as big as you think they are. And the last point I'll make, and it isn't particularly counterintuitive, and it kind of plays off a little bit about what Ali was talking about, and I think it's important in a room full of big-brained engineers. You know, be relevant, make things understandable. Some of the work that some of the folks in this room are doing is quite frankly imponderable to mere mortals like me. Matthew might actually pick up on this stuff, but sometimes it's a little bit tough for me. I mean, you know, guys like Peter Diamandis, or, you know, with his X Prize awards, or Paul DeBevic yesterday talked about some of the photorealism work he does in movies. I get that. You know, that's easy, right? But, you know, when you start talking about some of these grand challenges, you know, developing carbon sequestration methods or reverse engineering the brains, you got your work cut out for you. It doesn't mean you should give up, right? But you need to figure out how to make it relevant, because it's too easy for scientists, engineers, mathematicians, even journalists to get wrapped up in their own brilliance. You need to explain why it matters, and not just why it matters to scientists and engineers. You need to explain why it matters to me and why it matters to my 15-year-old son or my 78-year-old mother. What you're doing matters. And, you know, if we can do anything today, it's about helping you convey it, because it really does matter. And so with that, I'll turn it back over. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. Let's bring up the house lights. If you have questions, find your way to, there'll be people in the aisles with microphones, and we'd love to hear your questions and comments. In the meantime, we got some good tweets while you were talking there. And I think the most overarching one of them all, and any of you guys can take this. How are we supposed to get, we are kind of all exceptions here in the sense that we are predisposed toward this subject matter, but we frankly, we're the black swans in journalism, right? So there aren't a lot of people in newsrooms anymore. As Ali said, CNN reduced its science and technology efforts significantly a couple of years ago. There is no more science and technology unit. He's it. And he's got to do a lot of other things. So the question is, how are we supposed to get the public interested in science journalism if we can't even get journalists interested? Anybody want to take a whack at that?
I think, Miles, you skip right over it. What I've done is I've skipped right to the viewer, and the viewer is remarkably interested if you do what Jay says. You make it relevant, I think, 3 ways. One is you provide an explanation as to why it matters, and that we depend on the scientists and the engineers to do with our help in translating it. Number 2, you provide an explanation as to why it matters to you, the larger you being our audience. And third, and this is where the hook is for me, this is where it really works for me, is you provide a roadmap to how my viewer, who may not be an engineer, may not be studying science, how they can take advantage of it. So why it matters generally, because we need a clean environment. Why it matters to you can be many things, and then specifically, what can you do about it? Whether you can invest in it, whether you can retrain in it, whether you can send your kids. In doing that, we create general interest as opposed to interest amongst each other and ourselves, and then that drives my programming, because I now have viewers who think I'm going to do this on a regular basis, so the demand is established for it. Other people see it. My pitches from people, engineers and developers and innovators get better, and it feeds on itself, and we've skipped using journalists or recruiting journalists entirely. What they do is they see that there's success in this manner of delivery, and that's how it succeeds.
Well, the problem as I see it, and I'll let you get in after this, Jay, is that newsrooms are populated by poli-sci, English, and history majors, many of whom had experiences in the technical fields that frankly led them to journalism. That's why they're in that business, right? And so, and frankly, many of the people I would have to pitch stories to when I was at CNN were outright science phobic. And you know, you tell them the story and they'd say, oh, it sounds complicated and I don't get it, and so forth. And I cannot tell you how many times when I would prevail and get one of these stories through, like, you know, something really esoteric, like we were doing stories on buckyballs back in 1992, when that was really way out there stuff. And the funny thing is, you know, you'd show it to the final gatekeeper before it would go to air, and they'd look at it and they'd go, wow, you know, I know that was science, but that was interesting. That's exactly right. It's like, wow, where's that disconnect? So, you know, Jay, we'll do Jay, and then we'll bring it along.
But that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the fact is people aren't interested in science, but they love the space shuttle.
Right.
Right? You know, they're
just don't use the S word, right?
Well, I mean, but tell the story. Right? I mean, they're great story. I mean, like I said, I love that story Jeff Wilcox told yesterday about, you know, not putting paint on the space shuttle fuel tanks. I mean, it's just great. Tell the story. They're great stories to be told out there. And I think one of the problems that scientists face is that they don't think about it that way, right? They think about their great breakthrough. And they kind of need to remove themselves from that and try and tell this broader story, which is, you know, entirely compelling and important.
General interest newspapers have two disadvantages. One of them, it's not just who's in the newsroom, it's who the editors are. And they move up the track of covering politics, not covering technology.
Right.
Even at my paper, which has a tradition going back 100 years of science journalism. The other problem is, if I write about a new air traffic control technology, I'm writing for airline passengers who are interested but not technical, and I've probably got 50,000 pilots reading it, and maybe even 20,000 people with some experience in air traffic control. The trick in, as opposed to citizen media, I agree with you, that's a bad term. The trick in a general interest forum is writing something that will appeal to all of those different constituencies, including the former White House reporter who's now the editor-in-chief.
Well, you know, what's interesting to me, though, is in the effort to do that, it's a very difficult effort. You have a lot more time and space to do it in the New York Times. I remember being sent to cover space shuttle launches for CNN, and they would give us 2 minutes for the space shuttle launch, just enough to get the solid rocket boosters off. Well, now in the course of and then back to Larry King, right? And so, and in the course of that 2 minutes, you really cannot say much of anything of consequence about what you are seeing, what it means, except that you're about to see a fireworks display, and these people might die. So we're live. And that is the honest to goodness truth why they put me there. Well, in the end, that pleases nobody, because the person who is watching, you know, Shecky Greene on Larry King wants to see that, right? And the space nut is just completely pissed off because all you did was 2 minutes to the solid rocket boosters and didn't explain anything about the International Space Station or the mission. So, in a sense, this brings me to citizen journalism, which allows you, and what I've been doing since I left CNN is I've been doing these webcasts where you do 6 solid hours on the web of a shuttle launch. Well, if you're a space nut, you're going to love that, right? And sure enough, we had 300,000 people from 160 countries watching the last mission on the web through us because they, you know, this was a self-selected audience of space nuts. So I think citizen journalism, niche journalism, is actually a very exciting development.
Yeah, I mean, my point I wanted to make is that instead of asking political science majors to get interested in what you do, why don't you get out of your comfort zone and try to explain to the public what you do in a much more direct way? And so, you know, when I think about, I'm not a citizen journalist, I'm a blogger. I write as an academic about my field of specializations 3 times a week. I have about 12,000 readers on an average week looking at what I'm doing. I'm not soundbiting my ideas, but I am putting them in an accessible language which throws them out to a public that's much larger than the academic circles that I'm writing to. I've trained my students how to do this. This is part of what we ought to be doing in our professional societies, is take ownership over our own professional messaging and throw it out in the world. It doesn't mean that you don't work with these guys. If on a good day, if my blog's good, it gets seen by journalists in the field and they call me up and want to talk about it. It gives me access to them. But I've done the packaging he was talking about to put together what the core story is so that they have a reason to be interested in it. And I think, you know, the science field, the engineering field has been so insular for so long and is really good at communicating with each other, but is not very good at communicating with the rest of society. And I think that's the crux of it. The new ecology of media allows you more opportunities to get your ideas out in undiluted ways. What it doesn't do is guarantee you a mass audience unless you connect with a larger flow of ideas that eventually goes up to these guys. But you've got more control over it than ever before.
Yeah, I would say that the distribution channels have changed. We're talking about a tectonic shift, and you have the ability to tell your own story and reach people in ways that even a few years ago were absolutely inconceivable. But here's the trick, and this is the thing, I know you guys have all contended with this, and I always use the space station as a great example. The space station, this is probably one of the greatest engineering marvels, if not the greatest engineering marvel in human history, right? If you're an engineer, you look at that thing and you go, why don't more people even know we have a space station? And the fundamental problem, in my view, is that the people who tell you the story of the space station are in love with the space station. But really, the people at home who are watching CNN or picking up the New York Times, they're actually curious about how you go to the bathroom up there, you know?
Yeah.
And that sounds like they're being immature and scatological, but actually what that tells you is they're just interested in the human dimension of it. So as engineers, I would encourage you all, and I'd love for you guys to hear your thoughts on this, I would encourage you all to remember your great ideas are the story in some sense, but really it's about you. It's about your great mind and how the adventure of reaching that idea as much as it is about the idea. And if you forget that it's about people, you're never going to get on Ali's show. You're going to get, well, you might get the New York Times. They're good. But
Miles,
yeah, go ahead.
Let me tell you, to that point, and I really have sort of taken your mantle at CNN. We talk a great deal about space, for instance, more so than perhaps my audience even cares about. But this Chilean mining incident, which is not only an engineering issue, but NASA has been consulting with them on how to deal with the situation. How do you deal with the miners? Because it's a similar problem. Getting stuck in space or getting stuck on the space station is similar to being stuck underground because you're stuck and it's not in your control. And we brought NASA people in day one. We brought mining engineers in day one from Colorado to explain to us what the people side of this is. How do you deal with the people who are down there who are smart enough to know that they're going to be down there for several months? What message would you give them if you were there? What training do you go through to understand that? Remarkable human element to an engineering story.
And I would even say, on top of all that, what you're doing is you're actually finding, in this case, engineers to speak about a current event that might not be exactly what they're working on.
But they know it.
They know it and they bring science and engineering to the masses, right? So they can jump on a current event, whatever it is, and apply their expertise to that, and I think it elevates the discussion.
Well, that's how you get in, if you want to get in mainstream media, make sure you're reading the paper, first of all, or whatever, you know, the tablet, whatever you've got, however you're staying in touch with news. And frankly, I would encourage you to look for opportunities to connect what you do in your careers with what's going on in the news. Now, it's an interesting little footnote. I was in Houston right around that time that Ali was doing all of that, and there was tremendous reluctance inside NASA. I'm an advisor to NASA, and there was tremendous reluctance inside NASA to tell this story. And I was just incredulous. I said, you got to be kidding me. This is a great opportunity for NASA to, you know, sell its story, if you will. And there was this natural, oh gosh, you know, we not be stepping on toes and we're just trying to help out. We don't want to take credit kind of thing. Get over that, engineers. Get over that. Toot your own horns. Do not be reluctant. You know, once again, it goes back to that whole idea that, you know, and it's beautiful that you think good ideas are enough, but it's not enough. You have to sell them, and you have to sell yourselves. Anybody else want to pick up on that? I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox here now. I shouldn't be moderating this one. Here, let me have that seat. Questions from the audience? Anybody have a question in the audience? Yes.
I'm not an engineer. I'm with the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. So one reason why we are here...
How did she get in here? Get her out.
I snuck in through the back door.
Guards.
One reason why I think we're delighted, and I'm hoping that all of you who are on stage are delighted to be part of this conversation, is that we do see ourselves as having to learn from engineers. And the question that I have to all of you is, in this day and age of highly compartmentalized communication and journalism, where we're fragmenting everything down to a blog, to an individual story, to the sound bites, even your show, Ali, where it is, you know, the one big idea. What engineers have traditionally brought to the table is a much more systemic thinking. So how do we take systemic thinking in a very compartmentalized, very fractured kind of communication system and make that a true media ecology, as Henry Jenkins was telling us about?
So,
thank you.
When you say systemic, you mean incremental advances? Is that what you're talking about?
Not just more holistic, that we can think about how things work together and how they, so it's not just about the ones and zeros, but really how do we connect the different parts that then allow us to move forward, whether it's in communication or other human advances.
I would question the premise of the question. In my experience, engineers suffer from tunnel vision, and you'll find engineers who think they've worked the kinks out of a solar cell or a wind machine or a nuclear reactor with barely any conception of the commercial side or even the engineering side of how they're going to fit together on the grid. I find in airplanes, people who design them, people who fly them, people who design air traffic control systems, people who are specifically concerned with safety, and they often don't know that the other party is there or have a feel for how the whole system works. And I will say that one of the advantages of being a journalist, I am not an English major. I do have a degree in a certificate in auto mechanics from the Providence Vocational Technical Facility, and I am qualified to rebuild a carburetor. Alas, the last car in the United States sold with a carburetor was the Yugo. I sometimes think
you spent a lot of time with that carburetor, though.
The whole Yugoslavian Civil War may have been just an effort to destroy that factory. But I do find that sometimes an advantage of being a journalist is bringing some overview to it, as in the slide I showed on the intermittency of wind. While engineers don't always have a good conception, the public has even less. The public has an addiction to the silver bullet theory of engineering and doesn't have much of a feel for the way things fit together, and that's part of my job.
So when I was at MIT, I was housemaster in an MIT dormitory for about 14 years, so I got to know very well how MIT students confronted problems, especially engineering. And I understand exactly what Carola's saying, that unlike the administrators for whom if there was a problem they sort of shut everything down, the MIT students would break it down into component parts, figure out what's working, how to tweak and fix each part of it, and put it back together again so it moved more smoothly. I saw the same thing in a literature classroom at MIT. As, you know, in a liberal arts college, people clash over whatever is on the table and rip it to shreds, and engineers tinker and fix and resolve it in such a way that it comes out stronger at the end of a class period. And that's what I came to value about the engineering mind as someone who taught as a humanities guy at MIT. If I want to communicate that, I think the most effective media today for communicating that aspect of engineering has been games. I think Will Wright, in terms of thinking about how systems work, has done more to educate the American public than anyone maybe since Carl Sagan in terms of the field of science, with games like SimCity and Spore. Spore especially was designed to help people at a time that he realized evolutionary thought was being shut out of the classroom, to embed it in a game system where people could figure out how things evolved over time, how creatures dealt in complex ways within ecosystems. SimCity is a beautiful system model of the city and how the parts fit together from the energy system up. So I think science and engineering people ought to be thinking and collaborating with game designers more if what they want to communicate is a change in the system of how the world operates. It's much more effective than breaking it down into the bite-sized stories that the news media is driven with historically.
I haven't succeeded at a game since I had an Atari, but I actually have all of the gaming systems at home, and we do a disproportionate amount of our science, technology, and engineering journalism at CNN with games for that particular reason. That gaming connects with you. And by the way, I suffer all sorts of tweets and Facebook messages from people who say, have you not got more important things to talk about than gaming? But in fact, for that very reason, it draws people in. So the newest technology that Sony's got with its new lightsaber thing, it's interesting because what it does is it explains to people how this might apply somewhere else in life. Georgia Tech has had its event for the last week, and I keep bringing people in their fair, and I keep bringing people in to show us locally deployed applications where you go to a restaurant and you tell them,
that restaurant has subscribed to the system, and you tell them that you want a low sodium diet, and it'll tell you everything that's on there. It'll tell you what choices to make. These basic concepts help introduce a general audience, in my case, into larger things. I know we've gotten away from your question, but I just wanted to comment. We do a lot with the gaming side.
All right, well, I want to let's recalibrate here for just a moment about what the public is or is not interested in, and what our perceptions of that are. I think we're under the assumption here that the public is not interested. But what's interesting, I don't know if you saw this study. It was a few months ago. The Pew organization did a study of how people are consuming news these days, and the basic thesis of it was it's become a social thing. You share news, you participate in news. So all that's kind of duh, given all that what's happened with Web 2.0. But they asked these very same people what they thought the mainstream media was covering well and covering poorly. At the top of the list, the best thing that the mainstream media is covering, entertainment news. Surprise. So 99% say they're getting plenty of entertainment news. At the absolute bottom of that list, the subject matter that people feel is most poorly covered by the mainstream media is science and technology. So to me, there is a tremendous opportunity there. Somehow along the way, the mainstream media has missed this boat. Why is that?
I never got Paris Hilton into a story.
If you could figure out the engineering on that one somehow.
I think that the
how they place the camera, right? How they place the camera. No, let's not go there.
As I was trying to show about public misconceptions, the public doesn't understand sustainability and energy, and knows it doesn't understand sustainability and energy, and has decided it's not educated on this subject, and we're not educating them. That may in fact be correct. The media, though, is only one part of the non-education of the public on this subject.
Right. Anybody else want to talk about that disconnect on this underserved audience that for whatever reason is not being served?
Well, so I always worry about those kind of surveys because people will say, oh gosh, there's not enough science and technology coverage out there, but I don't know that they'd read it if it was out there. It's what you're supposed to say, because, by the way, there's tons of entertainment coverage out there, and there's not a lot of Matthew Walds in the world.
Well, it's like if you ask people if they buy the National Enquirer. Nobody does, and yet 2 million of them vanish from supermarket shelves every week. So, yeah.
But I mean, the ways of really making it relevant. So when we were talking about sort of, systems, for example, to be honest with you, I kind of question the premise of the question, right? People don't want to know about systems. I mean, maybe they do, but they want to know about video games, right? And it's about framing it. And I think one of the reasons why journalism doesn't cover technology more is because it's hard. And it's hard.
Bingo. That's what I would agree with.
And they've got to figure out how to make it accessible and understandable to the less big brain folks of the world, like everybody but Matthew on this panel, for example.
Well, there aren't many Ali Velshis in the world who are willing to, number one, are not afraid of the subject.
No,
number two, willing to boil it down in such a way that's true to the subject matter. And number three, then translate it to the fifth grader out there.
Remember back a few years ago, you and I would work every morning on American Morning. And we would do business. I would talk about business stuff every day. And this is probably why I like this, because it's less daunting than business news. And every morning I'd want to talk about a business topic. You and I would want to, and our producers would want to talk about the new flavor of Snapple or something like that. Now, the issue is the world became interested in learning details about business news when business nearly crushed them. And I think it's the same thing with engineering. As we get close to understanding that this is the key to our financial future and our prosperity entirely, we will all of a sudden become more interested. When you start realizing how dangerous things are in the environment, or how we're falling behind in terms of employment, it starts to become much more relevant to your life. And I think that's part of it. Our association, making it relevant, you guys and us, making it relevant, is going to be the answer to this.
Yeah, it's tough though, because it's one of these incremental stories that we're talking about, right? It's like covering global warming. It's very difficult to get people riled up about it. It's big, it's slow.
Not happening next week.
There's a certain sense of inevitability, and the same goes. What's that?
It's not tweetable.
It's not tweetable. How do you do it in 140 characters?
And I'll say also, I have a colleague who complains about our coverage of charismatic megafauna, by which she means, if you're doing a story about the environment, it's great if the victim is something cuddly, like an otter or a polar bear. If it's some microbe, it's hard to get people to feel good about the microbe or feel sad about the microbe.
Well, I did a story once on global warming for a show which shall remain nameless, but the initials are AC360, and sent it in to them, and they said, there's no polar bear. Can we get a polar bear? I said it has nothing to do with the polar bear. Get the polar bear in there, they said. We put the polar bear in. All right, got a question in the back.
So I'm approaching this as a student as well, and I know we talked a little bit, Professor Jenkins, you especially addressed this in engineering curriculum. It seems like it's 3/4 math and science and then that 1/4 humanities, liberal arts courses. And I was just wondering if you all had any specific suggestions for those of us who are students now, engineers who might be looking to improve, or students that are coming into college, on what liberal arts and humanities courses we could take that might...
Read a newspaper every day. Maybe read 2 newspapers every day.
His newspaper. And download it on the iPad app, right?
The New York Times.
And I got a great book to sell you.
I do think making time for the liberal arts and your engineering degree is crucial. And I know you got a very structured curriculum and a lot of pressure to complete it on time and so forth. But taking courses in journalism, in literature, in theater, in the political science sphere, that helps you to think about the public impact of your ideas. It helps you think about how to communicate them. And I'm serious about beginning as as students blogging your ideas, maybe join up with 3 or 4 other students to create a blog. You're not going to want to do it every day, but throw stuff out there and get used to framing it in a way that the public can hear. My students back at MIT got job offers, got positions created for them in companies because they became known and trusted voices in communicating their ideas, and do so in ways that are surprising. When we were talking just now about science journalism, I wanted to bring up the question of House MD, which is a very effective show, I think, not just at representing medicine, and there's some great people here in Annenberg that consult with medical show producers to try to get better science communication through it, but also the diagnostic process is well represented there. And there's several interesting blogs where medical students take each episode of House, break it down, critique the science, the health practices, the medical ethics, and ways that make those issues understandable to the fan base that is interested in a show like House. So adopting a show, debunking it, critiquing it, building discussion around it, find you a public that's interested in the same things you are, and get you used to framing it for that public so that you understand how you communicate with people who are not experts in the space that you're working in.
Do you have any classes here in communication? I mean, is there like communicating to the media, anything like that? Are there any deans here? Should we do that? Let's get that going. Yes? No? Giannis, let's talk about that for a moment. Have you ever contemplated some sort of curriculum that would help engineers tell their story?
Actually, we're working with the School of Annenberg to do something like that. We had a retreat about, a couple of months ago on how to create better synergies between engineering and communication. So it's something that is actually becoming more and more a reality. We also have better ways by which our students can communicate their ideas within our program. It's outside the curriculum. It's not a class, it's a requirement, but it's actually offered to them as an opportunity.
Yeah. All right, well, that's good. You had something, Jay?
Oh, I was just saying, one of the things, and I think it was Chuck Vest who said it yesterday, but get out of your silo. I mean, the work that you all do is phenomenal, but, it's like Ali was talking about how the NASA folks could talk about the Chilean mine. You'll find these great connections, and all of a sudden it'll help you talk about your ideas in an entirely different way. You're an engineer, get into theater, right? I talk about, I have a 15-year-old boy who's thinking about going to college pretty soon, and we talk about these things, right? You want to figure out how to take your expertise and apply it in a whole bunch of different ways, because, the world's your oyster right now.
Miles, I just want to say one thing on this, and that is that let's just understand that while we are all on side, and some of us like me might be frustrated engineers, the truth is I don't think there's been a time in recent history where engineering has been that crucial to the world's future. I'm not sure I can overstate this case. So as a result, you are carrying a mantle that engineers have carried in the past. There's no question that at many major turns in human history, engineers have been central to it. But that is what is going to be the case for the next 50 years. And as a result of that, it just becomes that much more important to ensure. I don't want anybody who's an engineer
not doing their engineering work as a result of being able to communicate. But in some fashion, we've just got to make sure that we're on top of making sure everybody understands how important the work is that you're doing and what its relevance is to the future that we're going to live in.
Lydia has a tweet for us. How can we utilize media to encourage young students to pursue engineering degrees? Of course, young people aren't really consuming the media like they used to, but how can we engage them?
I think expectations have changed, and the ivory tower of engineering has gotten taller and the walls have gotten stronger. When I bought my first computer, which was in 1980, the expectation was you would program it yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
That doesn't exist anymore. Almost everything you buy has a little sticker on the back that says no user serviceable parts. You couldn't take apart that little gizmo, which, by the way, was part of the Grumman Osprey. It was left over. I don't know what role media will play, but I will say that I'm surprised at how little ambition a lot of young people have to take something apart and put it back together again.
Yeah. Well, we don't make cars you can fix anymore. I wonder if that has something to do with it, right? You have to plug in a laptop.
To jump in to give an example of what you can do in terms of engineering. Aaron Riley, who's joined me here at Annenberg from MIT, developed a project called Zoe's Room up in rural Maine to introduce kids to STEM, young girls, middle school age girls, to STEM subject area. And one of the things she did was had each week a featured scientist or engineer, a woman who was working in that space, who made herself available to being interviewed online by students who were passionate about this online community and answer the sort of questions they had. And some of the questions were, do you have a dog, or what's your lifestyle like? And some of them were deep scientific or engineering questions. And she built activities that could be played online as well as activities that could be played in the classroom that grew out of that scientist visit and introduced them to the things the scientist or engineer had specialized in. And I think you need to do more programs like that expose kids at an early age to what it is you do, who you are, and what cool things you get to play around with.
Well, and as we heard yesterday in one of our panels, everybody can make a movie now, right? And it's getting easier and easier to be better and better. So, question for you.
Hello, gentlemen. Sorry, okay, it's a little bit far. We've spoke today at great length about the disparity between the public and essentially what it is that engineers do, and there is a rather famed disconnection between the communication abilities of engineers. I'm a bioengineering student from the University of Toledo, so I'll try to speak in complete sentences, right?
Short words for us, please.
Short words.
Yeah,
no. That's exactly what I was going to talk about. I think that there is a really large disparity between the purpose of actual engineers. Basically, here, let me just look off of this. Here we go. It's a case in point, right? I believe the root of the problem with how the public perceives engineers may lie in how the creative media has sort of conceptualized us. So I'm going to ask for some reciprocation over here. Essentially, if you take movies, the science fiction field that we've been talking about, that have been made in the past 10 years, you see this sort of trend as the engineers or engineering work as sort of diabolical. You take, for instance, Avatar or Repo Men, or let's say The Day the Earth Stood Still, and you see engineers not necessarily as doing something for the force of, bettering mankind, but rather something a bit darker, like
it's the Michael Crichton effect, right?
Yeah, the Michael Crichton effect, or they sort of paint us as the cold observers,
right?
The Virginia Woolf cold observer, the moth in the window. And I just wondered, in summation, how can we expect people to understand what we do when the creative media so regularly villainizes us and misinterprets our aim, which is very human?
Yeah, well, that's a big Hollywood question. You guys are pretty close to Hollywood, I think, right? So you might want to start working on that one. But there is this tremendous, perception, and that spills over a little bit into what we do, of the kind of the evil scientist and then the passionate crusader who triumphs over that in spite of the facts that the scientists have presented.
I never made a science fiction movie, but it does strike me that if we send a rocket to Mars and it lands, it's a triumph of science. If it crashes, the engineers screwed up. This is part of our popular culture.
Yeah.
I wonder if we were to actually study that question. It's an interesting premise, whether we couldn't come up with the other side, because until you actually said that, I thought you were going the other way. I thought you were going to say, how do we create more of the impression of scientists being the people who can change the world? So I guess it's all how you look at this. I think in popular science, increasingly, we're finding scientists and engineers saving the world than destroying it. So interesting how we can do that. It does all come down to having a narrative. The problem is that whether you want to make somebody evil or good in the movies, and that's not really us, it's what is their narrative? What's their motivation? Is it financial? Is it controlling the world, or is it actually making a better world? And if that narrative connects to scientists and engineers, that they are engaged fully in making the world a better place. And one of the things we did through the whole BP spill is we had people on our air, amateurs in some cases and professionals, on our air talking about potential solutions to this spill and whether they're looking at them or not. So, you know, it's this constant effort to try and make it seem useful and meaningful to humanity. It's a good message. Too bad we don't have somebody from Hollywood up here to answer.
Well, I got to say, I would be remiss if you didn't do your Dr. Evil right now, just a little bit. You know, I mean, he's here after all.
That's right.
So, did you want to add in something, Jake?
You wanted to talk about negative Hollywood perceptions by being a journalist.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it. That's right. That's right. Since All the President's Men was the last good one we had, right?
Yeah. But I was going to say really quick, too, I mean, but you know, there's also Apollo 13. I mean, there are, I think, good issues.
There's a good engineer movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I cry every time I see that one. Yeah. Thank you, Ron Howard. You know, hey, Sarah has a good one. Should students studying communication take an engineering class as well? Good point. I think they'd flunk, but it's a good point.
Well, you know, I hear this. I mean, yes, I think the answer is yes, but we've got to figure out a way to meet each other halfway. And, you know, as someone who studies humanities, I get awfully tired of the STEM rants that we're hearing about why don't we provide greater science literacy. I think we also need to provide literacy in civics and so forth. And there's always the assumption that the most important thing to learn is the science and engineering. And I'm quite happy to talk about science and engineering, but let's recognize that we need a well-rounded curriculum that everyone is engaged with, and it's got to be taught in a way that's accessible to a broad range of people. And I haven't seen most engineering courses taught in a way that engages people who aren't planning to be an engineer. So I think if we're trying to figure out how to teach media to engineers, then engineers have to learn how to teach engineering in a way that's meaningful to non-engineering majors. And what do we need to know from your field? What are the essence of the field that we ought to be engaged with if we're going to learn from each other?
Speak to the fact that we're not preparing people out of high school who don't want to be engineers to study anything to do with engineering in college. You can give up on that way too early in high school. Anything that could possibly give you literacy in science or engineering, and I think that's a big problem for us.
I think there are two different threads here which it would make sense to think about separately. One is, how do you build up the image of the profession of engineering? Smart kids will want to be engineers. And the other is, how does the public understand what it needs to about the physical world, the built environment, the nature of, for example, energy systems or industrial grade biology or that kind of thing? And I'm, to be honest, mostly focused on the second. Why the fuel cell isn't a silver bullet, for example, as opposed to why it's a good idea for children to be exposed to engineering, to consider going into science or engineering. I don't think that the former, that the business of changing the image of a profession and changing the number of people who go into a field, I don't think that's mostly a news media function.
But we can change that, though. You're right. It may not be the mission, but it does happen, doesn't it?
It may.
Yeah, it may. All right, down here in the front. We'll do ladies first. I don't know who was first. Who was first? Mm-hmm. All right.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, I think timing is everything. I heard a rumor that there's going to be a very large book fair event coming to the campus of USC moving from UCLA. And if you held this event, during a time when tens of thousands of people who are not only interested in reading but are going to physically be here, that you might have had an opportunity, for example, for people to come and listen to the magnificent presentations that were given here. So just if you could comment on how you move these venues to where people are as opposed to expecting people to physically come to you would be one comment.
Yeah, okay.
And the second is there's one press release on the table outside. And if there were, for example, an opportunity to team communications majors with the presenters, with people who are actually presenting material, and have them have material that people could take and write about, I think that would be also an effective way of being much more proactive in communicating. So I guess the message I'm talking about is engineers taking responsibility for, and the venues and organizations like the National Academy of Engineering taking communications as one of the critical components of how you take the message to people.
I guess that most engineers probably in this room would say that's not what I went to engineering school for, right? Would you agree? We got questions over there. Let's do this one over. Did you want to add on that at all? Anybody have any? All right. Question from right there, and we got some over there. Oh, you got a microphone over there. Good. Okay. Go ahead.
I believe that engineers should be reminded that there is a lot of ethics in what they do at all times. For example, if a doctor makes a mistake with a patient...
Can you hold that a little closer to you? There you go.
If a physician makes a mistake with a patient during surgery or whatever, one patient may die or be ill. But if an engineer makes a major mistake on a bridge or a highway or an overpass and people are driving, and there will be many more lives. So ethics in how they do it and how it is to be done very well, to last very long, and because we depend on what engineers make from the minute we wake up until we go to bed. If we ever listen to the radio, we listen to some engineer who made it. And I remember when I first came here during the shuttle, the landing on the moon, my friends, the Americans, went to bed. I stayed up all night because I thought it was a huge undertaking, a huge breakthrough in our society. But sometimes we start taking things for granted and expect them. And this is when the danger is. We should always be in awe of what engineers do every day. And if they try to do it well and do it with ethics, then it is more so affecting society.
Could I toss an idea in about that? The collapse of the interstate bridge in Minneapolis, which a lot of people mistakenly applied to maintenance, was actually made because of an error, probably by some person with a slide rule, given the time in which it was designed. It's in some ways easier to write about a laboratory discovery or about a demonstration plant, a pilot plant, or a new product introduction than it is to track down in the legal system exactly whose error that was and how it happened, because we'll never get to the root cause of that. That's going to be settled out of court. It's part of engineering coverage. It doesn't happen.
I got a tweet here from Doctor who says, engineers hate documenting. It says a lot about them. They're not tuned into communication, not even on a social level. I don't know if he was an engineer who said that.
Well, can I just comment for 1 second? I know we're going over. I just want to address both of these comments. I hope I get invited to this again. I love talking to all of you. Let's just remember, this isn't we're all on the same side of this thing. We shouldn't be covering this. You shouldn't be doing this during a book fair. Let's not cover the event. We need to cover the discoveries. We need to cover the changes in the world. This is our discussion. This is not how you're going to turn people on about engineering or get their kids to go to school or get people to do this. This is a crucial part of the exercise. But as for what we and the larger media need to cover to get all of that, it's not the event. The point is not getting 10 times as many people to this event. This may be exactly the number of people that you need to have at this event. The issue is getting the message to a much, much larger audience. The fact that anybody would even show up here because they were at a book fair means they're already sold, largely. We've got a much bigger audience to deal with who doesn't have interest in the environment around us, the conditions around us. We got to get a very tough audience. So in that sense, that's where it becomes a bit of our problem to interest people. But let's just make sure we think much bigger than than this. This is for us to get smarter, for us to go back to our organizations and think more creatively.
Final question over here. We're running over right now, but we'll get another question.
I got lucky. Thank you. This follows on 2 points, and one back to the entire panel about media. And that is a multidisciplinary approach in our universities is really the key. It's what we've been talking about. Commingling the scientists and the engineers with the sociologists, the cultural, everything that's involved in society. And engineers will take a problem and solve it, but they have to also be reminded that sometimes their solutions aren't the correct solutions. So the multidisciplinary approach is important. And the dean made a very good observation. The Annenberg School can begin to work more deeply with the engineering school. I had the pleasure of speaking to some of the students yesterday with Matt Wald, and I had dinner last night beside Ali, and we talked about these things at some length. It was surprising, and every time I talk to students, I ask this very simple question. How many of you have visited an electric power plant, either a fossil station or a nuclear station? And there was only one person in the room that had, in an engineering course. I think the students have to be exposed to the infrastructure. What's at the end of the wire? And this involves also teaching and mentoring to younger students that these college students can do, and also Engineers Without Borders, where they take their practice abroad and help developing countries. And this good news to mentoring the younger and helping developing countries should be publicized widely as good news stories and solutions. Now, here's the challenge to the team. How about a documentary, and I'm going to date myself, to the Jacob Bronowski sort of vintage, 1973, The Ascent of Man, and something that speaks about civilization, modern civilization, and beginning a series that says, what's at the end of the wire? Where do the electrons come from? Follow the wire, follow the electrons. Taking general society back to the base generating station, if you will, that shows them you cannot take this all for granted. This is all the great proposition where the 0.1% of the people in this room, living as we do, take this for granted. We drive by the power stations and the cooling towers, and we never understand what's going on there. I think if the panel could comment on perhaps a public documentary, a series that would really educate the general public about this massive infrastructure and how we rely on it, would be very useful. Thank you.
You know, I for one would find that fascinating, but I can only imagine writing up that pitch and trying to sell the folks at CNN on that one. And it would be interesting to try to sell that one. I think you probably could sell it to somebody like Nova.
If the protagonist took hostages.
Yes. Well,
I can totally get that on TV.
If the electron ended up in Paris Hilton's bedroom,
right, Paris Hilton, right,
that actually works, right? It ultimately, it went through her room right there, didn't it? I don't know. Any thoughts?
My paper has been running an intermittent series called Beyond the Fossil about alternatives. And it's a big topic, and Henry is correct, we tend to break things off in small chunks because they're digestible. The attention span of our readers isn't what it used to be. We have a national case of ADD. When I started, my editors told me I should be writing for a high school senior. Recently, one of my editors told me, this isn't clear enough, it's got to be comprehensible for the drunk in the bar. I would like to...
Which is why I've done so well in life.
I think that's a fine idea. I'm not sure it's a newspaper series. It might be aspects of it are a newspaper series.
Anybody else want to close it out?
Only to say that the difficulty, it's a great idea, the difficulty we have with this stuff is what you're talking about is going back to basics. We're not talking about groundbreaking in the future. We're talking about understanding what exists. It's a hard sell in our business because to try and get people to tune into what exactly is without there being peril and without there being threat and without there being drama is tough. But that's why we're here, to hear these ideas and think about ways in which we can do this. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Henry, final thought?
Well, I hear this charge about lowered attention span, and yet the same people complain because their kids spend 10 hours playing a video game back to back. I mean, I think there is a question of attention, but it's attention motivated by the desire to know, the desire to do something. And what we see across the entertainment industry is we both have to have attractors that draw attention and activators that give people something to do. And that's one where I think traditional journalism has been used to giving us information we think about rather than information we act upon. That I think the more you think about it as a game designer and motivate participation and engagement, rather than assume it. You don't have to lower the attention level of the audience. You have to motivate them to pay attention to what you're doing in a world where there's so many media options.
So maybe they have a stimulation addiction that we should be talking about as opposed to attention deficit.
I'm trying to get my mind around a New York Times game.
I've already figured out the CNN game.
I mean, they're being built. News gaming, there's, one of my colleagues, Ian Boas, has just done a book on news gaming. There are lots of experiments out there on specific problems where games are the right solution. They're not the right solution for everything. And I wasn't even suggesting a news game so much as thinking about what people do with the information you've presented them when you're done presenting it to them. Giving them activities to build off of it rather than simply take it all in. And I think that's the difference between the world of older media, legacy media we're used to, where we contemplated science specials like the ones we're talking about. And instead, what we need to do is have programs the media plays a role in, but they're also on the ground activities and ways of engaging the public with the issues of science and engineering.
Jay, just to close it out, I know you want to get to the book fair now. You probably want to get over there, right? But go ahead.
In a Twitter world, I'm going in the wrong direction. I went from newspapers to magazines to books. But I think Henry's right. It isn't that everything has to be bite-sized. Deep thoughts are welcome, but you got to present them in the right way.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. We went a little bit over. We apologize. Let's stand up for your picture. Jay Greene, Velshi, Matthew Wald, Henry Jenkins, squeeze in there for the shot. It's time for us to take a break, about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll resume. And we have an excellent 2 panels this afternoon, one this mid-morning on education, and then we're going to get down to business. Thanks a lot.